It's a pleasure to join the library professionals, publishers, and vendors in Charleston this week. Thank you so much for the invitation. What great energy this conference has, and that's no surprise to me, of course. I'm accustomed to witnessing phenomenal energy among the librarians after serving as academic leader on 3 small campuses, all liberal arts colleges, and all fewer than 1,800 residential undergraduates. All of my campuses have had some postgraduate programs, but all have had a primarily undergraduate focus. I love that the theme of this year's conference is "Too much is not enough." When I first started scribbling my own ideas in a notebook for this conversation, I wrote across the top of the page, TMI, ? After jotting down an anecdote about my first major arguments with my husband, who's an academic, when we were first married, I recall 2 kind of tense exchanges, both of which involved his mother telling me, "Don't ever let him tell you what to do," after I had purchased or pilfered old furniture that I adored. The first piece was a lovely walnut drop leaf table that I bought at an antique show, and the second piece was the lower half of an oak card catalog unit from the psychology graduate library at the University of Virginia, where Bob and I met. The card catalog was left near the loading dock of our building, and after walking by it daily for over a week, I decided to give it a home. "Why do you want that thing?" he asked regarding the card catalog. Now, this was about 1990. Well before the World Wide Web, but after the era of card catalogs. And I told him, our children aren't going to know what this is. It was at least 2 years before we would have any children, and that argument held little sway. But no matter, we still own both the table and the card catalog, and for the record, I was right. I own the only card catalog that my children have ever seen. So, my background includes a PhD in psychology, as you've heard. That means I have actually a lot in common with the average librarian. For example, people have no idea what I actually do, but they assume they do know. So while librarians often hear, "I bet you're going to shush me," or "What novel should I read next?" I tend to hear, "Uh-oh, are you going to tell me what I'm thinking?" Or, "Being a psychologist must offer great preparation for working with faculty." I'm actually trained as a neuroscientist, and I've studied central nervous system development and regeneration as a graduate student. What I do now has more in common with the average corporate or organizational leader than with a counseling psychologist. And actually, my shift from neuroscience to the provost seat has a lot to do with a serendipitous discovery of a book. But I'll cover that later. I also believe that both librarians and provosts have in common a shroud of mystery around the nuts and bolts of our daily endeavors. If you're not occupied exclusively with checking out and reshelving books, what do you do? More than one head librarian working with me has commented on the rarity of a provost who actually understands the varied roles that librarians play. "You get that we're not all archivists," one colleague said recently. I had an experience with some pretty bright students who got well into their junior year before learning what librarians actually do. 7 or 8 years ago, I was teaching an independent study course for 2 credits to 2 neuroscience pre-med students named Bennett and Carson. The course focused on the history of neuroscience, and this foray into the humanistic hinterland of their favorite scientific discipline was causing the young men a surprising amount of anxiety, for they could not measure with precision the accuracy of their work along the way. Around mid-semester, I gave an assignment that required research involving library databases. Bennett seemed in a panic. He tried bargaining with me to simplify or streamline his task, but I would have none of it. I had built into our syllabus a meeting with our science librarian, Hugh. When the students and I met again for the next class, a very enthusiastic pair of students greeted me. Bennett gushed, "Wow! I never knew librarians could do all that research for me. Hugh totally set me up. I can handle the writing. I just never knew that a librarian could find all that information. That was incredible. Could we just keep this between us? I mean, could we not tell the other students? None of them have any idea, and this totally gives me an edge." So if I can acknowledge that many students and probably provosts lack a full appreciation of the roles occupied by librarians, I hope you'll grant me the liberty to describe the role of a provost, in case some in the audience are unclear. I find that there's been a surprising degree of confusion on my 3 small campuses about what I do as a provost or dean versus what my executive assistant does. It occurs to me I'm visible to colleagues and the community members about 80% of the time, yet my work is tangible or visible only about 20% of the time. In contrast, my assistant is seen by colleagues 20% of the time, but the outcomes of her work are visible 80% of the time. The result is, of course, she makes me look very good, but many people think her work is my job and have no idea what I actually do. When speaking to groups on campus or off, I tend to describe my work metaphorically. I say that I have one basic agreement with my college. Every day when I walk into my office, there will be a box waiting for me at my desk, wrapped simply in brown paper. Sometimes the package is large, sometimes it's quite small. Sometimes it's neatly wrapped, and sometimes it's dented and torn. My commitment to the college is that I will take the box, open it, and deal with whatever I find inside. On some days, I'm a winner and everyone would want to be me. At other times, there would be no amount of money that would convince someone to trade places with me. So unpleasant are the contents. I've even joked that I've had a few days where it seemed that the delivery truck had backed up to my office and dumped a pile of vile packages for me to open all at once. But in the end, the key is that I will work through the processing of those contents and return the next day to do it again. This part of my job is quite consistent across campuses, regardless of size. What differs is the nature of the engagement by the provost versus members of his or her administrative team. Many of the issues that I deal with directly would be handled by assistant or associate provosts at a larger institution. On my small campus, I've had as many as 20 professional direct reports, including functions as varied as IT, museum, athletics, various centers, literary journals, international programs, study abroad, registrar, graduate and professional programs, library, and about 200 faculty members. I manage more than half of the institution's operating budget and more than half of its people. I hire and fire, build and cut budgets, meet with committees that develop and assess curriculum, address the concerns of faculty, staff, students, parents, and the president, collaborate with the board, meet with donors, develop and execute strategic plans, attend conferences, etc. Even if I wanted to spend more of my time pondering the future of libraries, I have little time to do so. And I need strong support from the college or university librarian if I'm going to be of any help. Provosts are not born knowing what librarians do. Provosts typically start their academic lives as faculty members, having been trained to seek scholarly truth according to the tenets of their chosen discipline. In the process of pursuing the advanced degree, we interact with librarians and make heavy use of library resources, but we don't typically see all the moving parts of a library's complex program. While teaching undergraduate and graduate students, we often partner with liaison librarians to teach students research skills. But our knowledge of the inner workings of the library can remain quite minimal. I learned a great deal about librarianship from having the experience of supporting tenure-track librarians through the promotion and tenure process. I assisted librarians in developing tenure files that would make sense to faculty committee, and I also worked with the committee to interpret and contextualize the files they received. That process taught me a great deal. And I encourage all of you to find a way to educate your administrative leaders in similar fashion, even if you don't have the tenure process within your library as a foil. I believe that my concept of the library has been influenced by my scholarly training as a systems neuroscientist. Bear in mind that your dean or provost almost certainly has a different scholarly style evident in his or her work. I always construct concepts as complex interrelated systems. I see the academic library as a program serving people rather than a building that houses books. In my work with other vice presidents on my campus or with our board, I try to convey that our libraries require more expertise than ever in order to organize information effectively for ready access of the highest quality content to serve a given need in research or teaching. Libraries and librarians are more critical than ever to the mission of the academic institution. Electronic resources are adding complexity to the work of every teacher and scholar. They are costly, they're hard to evaluate for quality. They challenge every campus, regardless of size, to manage collections differently in order to create balanced offerings among print and non-print resources. The library now must come into our classrooms and be delivered to our desktops, as well as woven into the learning objectives of our liberal arts curriculum. Clearly, I'm a big supporter of the library program and the librarians on my campus, but don't think for a minute that my library director swiftly and easily gets everything she asks for. Requests that come to me from the library must enter my provostial system, and effective management of me is critical to the library's success. Let me offer a brief primer on managing the provost in 4 parts. I'll call this my 4-3-2-1 system. First, the role of the provost, 4 Ps. I have a dashboard set of indicators that I use to communicate with the Academic Affairs Committee of the board about the quality and impact of our academic program. You may think of the provost as sitting at the top of an institutional pyramid, but I feel that I sit at the narrow space of an hourglass, pressured or influenced by factors above and below. I'm always mindful of the need to contextualize my work to the board. I generally organize the dashboard indicators that I track into 4 categories, the 4 Ps of people, patrons, policies, and pennies. In the context of our institutional mission, I track how we're doing with regard to our people, whether we're properly training and developing staff, and the state of morale, for example. Our patrons, are we serving our students, parents, community members well under our mission? Our policies, are we clear and in compliance? Are we solving more problems than we're creating? And our finances, are we effectively stewarding the resources that come to us through tuition, fundraising, grants, etc.? This is called a balanced scorecard model, balancing out the tendency of many board members or corporate executives to focus excessively or exclusively on financial indicators. I do this for the academic program as a whole, but you can adapt this approach or the approach used on your campus to bring order and clarity to your reporting of the library's impact. Your institution probably has an academic dashboard as well. You may look for it on your IR website to get a sense of the language used on your campus to talk about benchmarks of success. Aligning the library's reporting with the current strategic priorities for the academic program could aid in developing a powerful shared language with your provost that will help you to connect your priorities with those of the academic leaders. The 3 in 4-3-2-1 refers to the provost's priorities, the 3 Rs. While our campuses may differ greatly in size, resource base, and culture, I know enough of your provost to understand what priorities we're likely to share. We all grew up learning the 3 Rs of reading, writing, and arithmetic. The new Rs for independent colleges, however, are risk, revenue, and reputation. When anyone approaches me to gain support for something new or costly on my campus, I silently calculate the return on investment in terms of whether the expenditure will reduce or manage institutional risk, including copyright infringement, personnel training issues, etc., whether it would generate or enhance revenue, including retention of students who bring tuition dollars, or enhance institutional reputation, which enhances our ability to recruit and retain students, get grants, and work with donors. My best library directors have been effective at building these priorities into their planning, as well as helping me to see the connections. The 2 in 4321 is the Library Provost Partnership, just the 2 of us. I appreciate that my head librarian uses some of her time during our one-on-one meetings to tutor me on the library's big picture issues. We talk about how our program can inform critical discussions, such as expanding pressure to provide online courses, the implications of MOOCs for undergraduate education, current best practices in STEM pedagogy, space and storage challenges for our collection, collaborative programming with area institutions, etc. I appreciate that these meetings offer an opportunity for me to learn from our top expert in library science. I also appreciate having, as a result of our conversations, some cogent responses for faculty or board members who call me to share big ideas based on their viewing of last night's newscast or their reading of the morning's higher ed headlines. Finally, 4321, one big thing that I need is focused strategy. I have suggested so far that you focus on the 4 categories of dashboard metrics, the 4 Ps, the 3 Rs of risk, revenue, and reputation, the 2 of us in partnership, and finally, the one thing I really need from my head librarian and her colleagues is to stay strategically focused. Across all 3 campuses where I have served as a senior academic administrator, the library has been the part of the academic program with the best approach to setting departmental strategy and staying on message. Of all the reporting partnerships I've had with associate deans and directors, I've been mentored and educated in the managerial arts, most effectively by a couple of gifted head librarians, one of whom is here at this conference, and she was the leader of the library that won the 2009 ACRL Academic Libraries Award in the liberal arts category. Joan Rowell, now of Elon, and I work together closely at Hollins University. I hope you'll go back to your home campus empowered and prepared to teach someone in your administrative leadership team about what you do, as well as why and how you do it. And I thank you very much for your time.
So Jim suggested that I have a provostial role at AAU, and I think I'm going to use that argument with AAU President Hunter Rawlings, see if I can plug for a raise. But in fact, I've never been a provost, and I've never been a librarian. But I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night. So I'm going to talk about some issues that I have been involved in of provost-librarian collaborations. How do I make this thing go forward? I just turned it off. Got it. First, quickly, just a little bit about AAU organization operation. We were founded in 1900 by 14 universities that offered the PhD. That was out of 38 at the time. Our initial purpose was to improve and standardize PhD education, which was a mess at that time, widely viewed incorrectly as inferior to European graduate education. Our current membership is 60 US, 2 Canadian universities. These are strong, research-intensive universities, 36 public, 26 private. And this relatively small set does have a significant impact on research and education in the US. 58% of all federal research funds go to these institutions. 15% of the bachelor's degrees, 45% of the research doctorates. We house 65% of the postdoc positions. 75% of the members of the National Academy of Sciences are from AAU universities. And we have a significant publication and citation, 67% of the total US publications, 19% of the world total, and 89% of the US total citations, and 35% of the total. Now, I want to talk about 2 major collaborations involving provosts and librarians. The first started out in 2009, the Scholarly Publishing Roundtable. I suspect some of you have heard about this. It was created by Bart Gordon, congressman from Tennessee, then chairman of the Science and Technology Committee. And he charged this group with developing consensus policies for expanding public access to journal articles arising from federally funded research, not just discussing, but expanding. So there was a pretty activist charge. And the committee put together a group of key stakeholders, librarians, publishers, university administrators. And Bart did this because he was getting hammered from both directions. On one day, a group of librarians, public interest group folks would come in and say, you have got to get the federal government to take all of this taxpayer-funded research and get it back to the public for free. And the next day, publishers would come in and say, if you do that, you will hurtle us back into the dark ages, we'll end scholarly communication, it'll be disastrous. So here's the group that put together the provosts, Dave Campbell, Boston, Richard McCarty, Jim O'Donnell, then provost at Georgetown, who, as he just pointed out, was then later promoted to the faculty. I was made chair. I think they thought I could be neutral by virtue of my ignorance of the issues. Paul Karan, Ann Okerson, Scott Pluchek were the librarians, and we had both for-profit and not-for-profit publishers. And this was a really good group that worked hard for the better part of a year. We were helped ably by Fred Davis, Don King, Carol Tenneper. We produced a report, I think, that was really quite good, very thoughtful. We identified a number of key principles that had to remain in any kind of scholarly communication business model that would emerge. We had a number of recommendations, but the core recommendation was that each federal agency should expeditiously but carefully develop and implement an explicit public access policy that brings about free public access to the results of the research that it funds as soon as possible after those results have been published in a peer-reviewed journal. Now, there's some waffling issues in there. Make it available as soon as possible. But the point is that 12 of the 14 members of this task force said, yes, we do believe that the federal government should make the results of taxpayer-funded research freely available as soon as possible. The two that didn't sign on were illustrative of what I think, and I'll say a little more about this later, is a continuing problem within the scholarly communications community. YSG of Elsevier, to crudely and I should say both of these members that didn't sign were really productive, hard-working members. They tried hard. YSG of Elsevier didn't sign on because he thought our recommendations called for too much government intrusion into scholarly publishing. And Mark Patterson of the Public Library of Science didn't sign on because he thought we didn't call for enough public government involvement. The report didn't seem to have a huge impact. But 3 years later, last February, John Holdren, the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, published a very significant directive on public access that echoed much of the recommendations that were in our report. That memorandum calls for all federal agencies with $100 million or more in research funding to make freely available for search, retrieval, analyze peer-reviewed publications and data resulting from federally funded research. The research manuscripts were to be made available using a 12-month embargo period as a guide, with agencies able to move that up or down based on the mission of that agency and evidence from disciplinary needs. Significantly, the memorandum was very clear that all the agencies had to consult with external stakeholders and take the results of those views into account in developing their policies. The agencies have submitted plans. They were due in August, and OMB and OSTP are now reviewing those. They will then go back to the agencies for final implementation. The $100 million threshold of the directive for research funding would obligate 11 federal agencies to participate, but in fact, over 20 agencies have chosen to participate in this process, there is a real interest among federal research funding agencies in making the results of the research they fund widely, broadly, freely available. Responses to that directive, there are two major ones. First one is SHARE. This is a university initiative. It's being developed by AAU, ARL, Association of Research Libraries, and APLU, the Association of Public Land Grant Universities. And this brings me to the pain I encounter of acronyms. Notice that we had to capitalize the H in SHARE in order to get this. And I'm going to say more later about this curse in Washington of acronyms, but there we have it. And what we propose to build is a cross-institutional national network of digital repositories. One of the key features of this is going to be to make it seamless for faculty so that faculty can comply with agency-designated repository requirements using a single common user interface. The SHARE system will deal with the complexities which are sure to arise when we're going to have over 20 federal agencies that are going to have a cacophony of competing compliance requirements, and we want that to be invisible to the faculty. But another major reason for our doing this is independent of the OSTP policy process. This is consistent with knowledge creation, dissemination, and preservation as core missions of a university. The other competing activity is another acronym, CHORUS, Clearinghouse for Open Research of the United States. This is being developed by publishers, and it's a large group of publishers, for-profit and not-for-profit, that estimate that collectively they publish about 90% of the U.S. federally funded research. And their description of their process, or of the product that they're producing, a multi-agency, multi-publisher portal and information bridge that identifies, provides access, enhances search capabilities, long-term preservation to journal articles resulting from agency funding. So the question now is, what's the relationship between SHARE and CHORUS? Are we going to cooperate or compete? And I think that's not clear. So look at the differences and similarities between the two. SHARE is at its very early stages. Most of our universities are building or have institutional repositories, but we have a lot of work to do to get them robust on their own campuses and interconnected and interoperable. But the final network that we intend to build does promise to make research articles, data, and their associated metadata freely accessible for reuse, text mining, data mining, and machine reading. CHORUS, they've got Crossref, they're building FundRef, they've got Crossmark. The publishers have a robust basic structure and capacity in place. And they are telling the group of publishers that make up CHORUS, are telling the federal agencies, they can respond to the basic requirements of the OSTP directive with not a penny spent by the federal government. The publishers already have the capacity to do this. They are telling us, the universities, we can meet the compliance requirements for your author submissions. They're all publishing in our journals, and we'll take care of the submissions for you, which is very appealing. But there's a great deal of uncertainty about the terms of use for post-embargo content. What will the system be if the publishers essentially implement this entire structure themselves? What will the use properties be of that post-embargo content? Now, it would be smart if the university people involved in SHARE and the publishers involved in CHORUS would sit down and talk about ways that they could collaborate. That would be the pragmatic approach, and we have had one very productive conversation with publishers, hope to have more, but there are emerging a set of legislative battles that I really think may drive this collaboration apart. And we have more acronyms. So FASTER, is Fair Access to Science and Technology Research Act. This is the successor to FERPA, which was the Federal Research and Public Access Act. It has many of the properties of the OSTP memorandum, but it's statute, it's law, not, if passed, not regulation. And as opposed to NIH's PubMed Central, which has a 12-month embargo period, or the OSTP directive, which has 12 months as a guide with agencies able to move up or down, this legislation would cut the embargo period in half for maximum. And I think some publishers are quite concerned that that would really jeopardize their subscription business models. This just came out as a discussion draft this past Tuesday. First, a new acronym, Frontiers in Innovative Research, Science, and Technology. This is a successor to the America Competes Act. And I want you to look at COMPETES, creating opportunities to meaningfully promote excellence in technology, education, and science. I mean, that is one of the most preposterous acronyms I've ever heard. You don't need to know that FIRST followed COMPETES, but I just wanted you to experience that acronym yourselves. This would increase the embargo period to 2 years, with provisions to extend beyond that to 6 or 12 more months, going in the opposite direction. So here we have universities, libraries trying to cut the embargo period in half. We have publishers trying to double it. And I fear that what we are doing, these stakeholders in the scholarly communications system are degenerating into operating like the two political parties in our Congress, and that's a very pessimistic projection. I want to close with some comments about what I think is a really quite promising set of initiatives. This is a group, ARL, AAU Task Force on Scholarly Communication, that we put together in 2012. 6 provosts, 6 librarians. We have 3 vacancies now. Tragically, one of those is Ann Wolpert of MIT, whom many of you know tragically died recently. She is going to be a huge loss to the library community and to higher education. 2 provosts left under better terms. Peter Salovey got tired of being provost, so he's now president at Yale. And Kim Wilcox is now the chancellor at UC Riverside. But we will replace these because this task force has a lot of work to do. It decided to focus on 3 areas: university presses, scholarly journals, institutional repositories. And in presses, the concern is that books are being crowded out of library budgets by journals. Universities are reducing subsidies. And the capacity for production of books is jeopardized. So a couple of things that we've been thinking about is the possibility of consolidating sort of back office digital production capacities across presses. There is some precedence for this. But I think most substantively, moving from subsidizing presses to subsidizing authors, having universities subsidize faculty members' first books, which are typically the hardest to get published. And these would be digital, open access books because we've paid through subsidy for the cost. So one of the most significant things here is that even when faculty can get their book published and they sell 223 copies, you've got a limited dissemination. If that book is published electronically and is open access, you've got a massive opportunity for much broader dissemination. So I think it's a very promising initiative. And in scholarly journals, what we hope to do is collaborate with some society publishers to move toward open access publishing of journals via hybrid journals, where you have a traditional subscription model, but the journal will publish a given article open access if the author pays the publishing charges, the APCs. To make this feasible on a large scale, we have to get rid of double dipping, because typically what happens now is the added revenue through APCs for open access articles is simply added to the subscription revenue, and that's not going to work. it isn't a big deal now because these journals, the number of articles that are published open access is relatively small. But if we do this large scale, we need to figure out a way that as the APC revenue increases, the subscription cost decreases equivalently. We've been working with a very smart consultant, Raym Crow, whom I'm sure many of you know, on both the presses and the journals. He's written a couple of thoughtful papers on this. He assures us that doing this declining subscription journal revenue with increased APCs is something that we can do feasibly. And finally, what we decided to do was institutional repositories. This was really Ann Wolpert's proposal, both to make the repositories more robust on campus and interoperable, interconnect them. She thought early that this would connect with the federal agency public access interest, but now with the OSTP memo, that initiative is off with SHARE. I want to close with something that was supposed to be what this panel was about. And I recently talked to a provost and a librarian at one of our member universities who work very effectively together, and I asked them separately about what they were looking for from each other. The provost said he wants a librarian who can be supportive with innovative activities to expand support, new kinds of support, to reduce costs, customer focus, to have students and faculty in mind in developing collections and support services. He wanted advice and counsel from his librarian. He wanted that librarian to be a public presence, a strong voice on campus in support of teaching and research. And the librarian, whom I asked separately, said she wanted her provost to be a good listener, to value students as well as researchers, saying she had had a lot of experience with provosts that seemed to be focused only on faculty, and wanted a provost who would support efforts in innovation. And I think the match between these two really defines the effective relationship that they have. And we are going to need more of that, because I think looking to the future in scholarly communication, we need provosts and librarians on campus working with each other as an effective team to bring in other administrators, faculty, and students in advancing institutional capacity in scholarly communication. The challenges and the opportunities to exploit the new capacities in digital communication, the challenges are far less technological and much more cultural. And we are going to have need for a national collective action within the academy to really make some significant change. And AAU and ARL are about to launch a systematic effort across a large number of universities to have provosts and librarians talking with their faculty about the importance and the value of the kinds of changes that are possible. It is a fact that many faculty operate very well in this current system. The problems with it are invisible to them. That's a tribute to the university administrators, but it's also a problem that we have to overcome. And I think that both for universities, for publishers, for government agencies, the policies and practices of all of these sectors, including pricing policies, should reflect the public purposes and public financing of higher education and research programs. We should not be seen by government agencies as a convenient victim for unfunded mandates. We shouldn't be seen by publishers as a captive audience for generous amounts of revenue. All participants in this scholarly communication system should see it as part of a largely publicly funded service to society and participated in that vein. Thank you very much.
The leading ex-provost, Jim O'Donnell, now a man in retirement, semi-retirement, I've been promoted to the classroom, please.
Changed his name as well, I noticed, and has brought a fresh and even more exciting panel of distinguished people here. And they have plenty of time, so you've got plenty of time for questions, all those questions you didn't dare ask your own leaders in your academic space. And you can ask them, you can put your hand, you can wear a burqa or something if you like, in case you're worried. If you can find... So, Jim, roll.
Anthony, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you here again. We appeared on this stage a year ago with a different panel of speakers in a panel on what provosts think librarians should know. It was well received, but afterwards, Katina came to us and said, "So do you think you could do it again next year?" Well, yeah, I'm sure. But she said the feedback made it clear that there was one change people would like to see. Last year, we had a distinguished, engaged, entertaining, optimistic, supportive panel of provosts. She said, "Do you think this time you could find people who were less nice?" I said, "No. But you of all people realize in this room, in this hotel, in this town, that what we all share in common, however distinguished and successful we are, is an inability to say no to Katina." So a negotiation had to follow. We agreed, because I explained to her carefully, that provosts are indeed, by genetics, by training, by experience, simply the nicest people in the world. You know this from your own experience. If one of us tried to snarl at you, it would be so evidently lame and phony you would simply giggle and we wouldn't even try. So we settled not for lack of niceness, but for frankness and directness. This is an opportunity to talk about issues that perhaps sometimes you are a little bit nervous about talking to your own campus leaders about, as Anthony indicated. I think we did have some success in that last year, and I hope we will today. I'm going to introduce our three speakers, let them then speak, and then we will turn it over to Lord Anthony from Downton Abbey to referee the question and answer period. Reading left to right. To my left, Beth Paul is provost at Stetson University in Florida. She came there in 2009 as provost after years of increasing responsibility at the College of New Jersey during a time when that institution made real transformations and steps forward. She is herself a psychologist and has particular interest in community and service learning projects in the university. To her left, Janine Stewart, also a psychologist, is the new provost at McDaniel College in Maryland. She had served previously for 5 years as provost at Hollins University in Virginia, and had before that made her bones, as it were, in an increasingly responsible series of positions and a distinguished career at Washington and Lee University. Finally, to bring a little diversity to the panel, we have John Vaughn. John Vaughn is also trained as a psychologist. This was not a theme I was looking for in particular. But John has been with the American Association of Universities, the association of the leading American research universities, since 1980. Since 1996, he's a little bit ersatz, but I'm going to say that he serves as provost of the AAU in his role as executive director there, where he sees and understands the issues that face our largest institutions. He's also an old friend and colleague of mine and of libraries in general. He has particular responsibility in AAU for issues involving intellectual property, information technology, scholarly communications, and the like. Since he comes not from the dreaming spires of Georgetown, across Rock Creek Park, far away from all of those other people, but actually works on the east side of Rock Creek Park down in the real Washington, he has, unlike the rest of us, at least met people who are not nice, or he has at least seen episodes of House of Cards and knows what it would be like. So he may be able to channel something a little blunter than the rest. My warmest thanks to my colleagues for making the time and effort to come down and join us. I told them all true things about what a splendid occasion the Charleston Conference is, and I think they are finding that out. But I will now turn the podium over to them, and in the order in which I introduced, I will ask then Provost Beth Paul to begin. Thank you all for coming.
Good morning. I feel as though I must start with either a bark or a growl. And I am afraid that I offer neither. But what I do offer is a rallying cry to all of you to not just consider yourselves leaders of libraries or associated with leaders of libraries, but really to be leaders of higher education. So my remarks this morning are talking about the very important role, and I would dare say unique role, of the university library and library leaders as institutional change agents. This is a quote from what you will recall as the 2006 Spellings Commission report. Does that sound like it was a long time ago? That was in 2006. And I must say, I don't think this has changed much. So American higher education has become increasingly risk-averse, at times self-satisfied and unduly expensive. It's an enterprise that has yet to address the fundamental issues of how academic programs and institutions must be transformed to serve the changing educational needs of a knowledge economy. It needs new paradigms. Yet, this was 2006. We have cries that predate that, and we still find ourselves behind the 8 ball. We still find ourselves confronting a dire need for change. Let me tell you a bit about Stetson University for those who don't know about Stetson. Stetson is a private university with 4 locations in Central Florida, spanning the center of Florida, so from DeLand at the easternmost point all the way to Gulfport at the westernmost point. We have at this time about 2,700 undergraduate students. We're growing to 3,000. And we have about 1,400 graduate students with about 1,000 in law. We are primarily residential. We have 4 colleges and schools that organize the academic program. We do have a very strong liberal learning core, and the character of learning that we emphasize at Stetson University has to do with rigor or challenge, relationship, a close personalized interaction among students, faculty, and staff, and also with a sense of responsibility bigger than oneself. We are wonderfully endowed with 2 libraries at Stetson University. The main library, the DuPont Ball Library, is multidisciplinary, so it supports the College of Arts and Sciences, the School of Music, as well as the School of Business Administration. And it is this library that I'll be giving you some examples from primarily today. We're also very, very pleased to support the Dolly and Homer Hand Law Library, which is in our Gulfport campus. It is unidisciplinary, focusing on the legal field, supports the College of Law, and we do have a satellite library at our at our Tampa Law Center campus. So, one university in the national higher education landscape. 2009, I joined Stetson University with the new president, Wendy Libby. We came in July and found an institution that had been struggling for quite some time. We found an institution that had been perhaps coasting, not thinking strategically, not taking care to balance university resources in a careful way. And so we walked into an institution where the enrollment goal had missed by about 20%, and the budget hadn't been balanced for quite some time. And the phrase, and I dare say I don't even want to say it with my 3 colleagues in the audience because it will send shivers up their spine, but the conversation years and years before that was budget stabilization. Every year it was about budget stabilization, which meant cut everywhere. So our goal has been to restore Stetson University as a very important higher education institution in the landscape nationally. And what is so important in this effort is the mission of the institution. And I suspect those of you who are at higher education institutions, you can also identify the critical nature of your missions to the future of higher education as well as to the future of society. So draw strength from that, draw passion from that, and remember that higher education is an important answer to many of the social issues that we face. So draw strength from the mission. And that is what we've done. We've
become more bold about our messaging, about the place of Stetson University in the higher education landscape. And families and students are being very responsive to that. Fast forward, we are now from a low of about 1,950 undergraduate students when we first came here. We're up to 2,700. We have great response from students and parents. We're now able to start growing the faculty. We're now able to start growing the staff. So it is a success story. But I want to tell you about the way that the library has been a unique change agent in that process. When I arrived at Stetson, not to share dirty laundry in front of all of you, but honestly, I had one strategic leader among my team, or the team that I inherited, and that was the director of the library. And if not for her, a long-serving director of the library, and the kind of innovation that she was bold enough to continually do in that library, I don't think our transformation would have been so successful. And I'm going to spell out for you why I think that's true. So, the remainder of my remarks are about the role of the university library and library leaders in university renewal. You are essential to university renewal. So, universities, in many ways, the libraries are more reflective than our academic departments of what society needs from higher education. So the libraries are where interdisciplinarity is natural. Libraries are supporting students in learning multiple literacies. Libraries are swimming versus drowning in information. Libraries are innovating and being bold about defining ways to swim, to make positive the increase in information rather than to drown in it and simply to, quite frankly, become denying of this new information because it's simply too overwhelming. And libraries are nimble, they take risks, they're adaptable, they've had to. This is the DuPont Ball Library. I will speak most about this library as the multidisciplinary library, and that's really an emphasis that I want to build upon. So what are the critical roles of library leaders? Now, I didn't mean this to look like a beehive or some, I didn't mean it to look like a honeycomb. In fact, had I been more clever, I would have made this as multiple hats. The Stetson University was funded initially by John B. Stetson, which is why it has the name Stetson, the hat maker. So I easily can construe this as the number of hats that our librarians take, and I could add them so that it looks like a tall order, and it is a tall order. So some of the critical roles of library leaders: bridges, educators, path makers, integrators, innovators, success coaches, change agents, role models, hosts, collaborators, and they're neutral. So let me draw out some of these and talk about some examples. So first, change agents and path makers. Library leaders, by necessity, have been adaptive leaders. They have constantly adapted the business model of the library. Some of the recent innovations, which some of my colleagues have presented on nationally, have been demand-driven acquisitions, our ebook program, which has been incredibly successful. Library leaders have to be proactive versus reactive. They have to be innovative and resourceful. They're future-oriented, so they're looking at leading change. Even the conversation that we've had this morning, it is about leading edge, not lagging. And so you are very, very important change agents in the universities. You are used to, you know how to make new paths, and that is different than many other areas of the institution. You are innovators. You are proactive versus reactive, as I've mentioned. You discover, you develop, you look for new tools almost constantly. You are constantly looking at the integration of technology. Rather than being afraid of it, you must integrate technology into what's happening in the library. And so you are doing that with great aplomb. You are academic innovators. You are inciters. So under the guise of service provision, you are introducing new strategies and new resources as triggers for faculty, for students, for pedagogical advancement, for research advancement. You are these seeds that are being built around the institution that are really inciting all sorts of changes. And you're doing that in a safe way, which is very different than, I think, what I can do, for example. You play a very important contrasting role. Educators. Certainly you are some of our most prized experts in learning. You are also very important informants about students as learners. So we observed that this morning. You are frontline observers. You are interacting with students on a daily basis. You are watching their learning process. You are watching how they are manipulating or interacting with all different kinds of resources for learning. And so you have a very important role in faculty and staff development. Don't underestimate the expertise that you have that can have an impact well beyond the walls of the library. You are hosts. You are hosts that create a very important sense of place in a world where sense of place is dwindling. We are human beings. Maybe there's a reason that we're all psychologists up here. Excuse me. We are all human beings, and human beings have need for connection. They have need for community. They have need for relationship. Yes, you can get some of that virtually, but some of it you can never get virtually. And so emphasizing library as place is essential. We need our libraries to be places for wonder, for expanding one's mind, for transformation. This idea of collision, it reminds me of the movie Crash that featured Don Tweedle. And the point of that movie was that we have become so disconnected in society and so obsessed with our electronic modes of communication that we've forgotten how to interact. And so the premise of the movie is the only way we know how to interact anymore is by crashing into one another. And I think there's an interesting parallel to that. We want to be a place for intellectual interaction and celebration. One of the things that we host in our library is an undergraduate research celebration, where students from all over the state came and presented undergraduate research projects with their faculty and families attended. What a wonderful celebration of the work that happens. Library leaders as building a sense of community, belongingness, wellness. This happens to be a study time, a study break. We take care of our students. Come to the library, we take care of you. We'll support you in this challenging business of intellectual development. It's a place for innovation, intellectual play, experimentation. And mostly it is a place that helps us to reinforce intellectual identity as part of a life well lived. To me, that's a very important element of the library in our communities. Library leaders are success coaches. Certainly the trend of learning commons, and we're seeing a great increase in partnership with student success and integrating various student success elements into our library. We also have many of our librarian staff and faculty trained as success coaches. So an integrated student success coach model, where we are all part of our students' progression, positive progression to graduation. So I believe library leaders play a very important role in retention and progression. And you're a student employer. You are a career developer. There is great transferability of librarian skills. Every single one of our students would benefit from that. Many of our libraries have the highest proportion of the student employees on campus. How are we turning that into a purposeful learning opportunity so that it is a purposeful part of career development? You are neutral. You are safe, trusted, apolitical. I'm not making comments about you as individuals, but as a group. And so, you play a special role, a central role in the university. In our institution, our library faculty play very important roles in faculty governance, in shared governance. We have had chairs of the curriculum committee, of the academic technology committee, of the provost think tank, essentially, the academic planning advisory council. We have had a chair of the tenure and promotion committee. Now, yes, this is a heavy hat that gets put onto our librarian faculty. I would dare say they have some of the highest service loads in our university, but they play critical roles in being seen as university-wide leaders and being appreciated as neutral leaders plays a very critical role in the advancement of shared governance. You play a neutral role in curriculum development. And so our librarian faculty have been very, very important in general education development, for example, but also disciplinary and interdisciplinary curriculum development. And I must say, most important for me as provost is the role of the library dean on my senior academic leadership team. This has been a very, very important role. I did commute the role from a director position to a dean position, and I did that deliberately because I see the library as one of many, but a very important agent of learning for all of our students. And it is very important on my team to have this neutral person, to have this university-wide leader. So among my deans, what I say to my deans is the first thing you are is a university leader. You are not the leader of a separate little 501c3 that happens to be cohabiting on our campus. You are a university leader. And having the dean of the library there helps to punctuate that and helps to continually draw everyone to a university frame of perspective. Your collaborators and bridgers, you are one of the best coalition builders inside, outside the university. You are developing partnerships on behalf of the institution in many, many important ways, mutually beneficial in all sorts of ways. Your bridges to new information and knowledge between people and entities. You are new student and faculty socializers. One of the things that our dean of the library did last year was to meet with every single prospective faculty member. Met half an hour with every prospective faculty member, and we hired 30 faculty last year, so it was quite a tall challenge. But this was very important. This established a partnership between the faculty and the library right from the beginning. Also, we have personal librarians assigned to all incoming students. Many of you probably do that too. It's a very important transitional function for our library. You are integrators. It's a place for interdisciplinary percolation. For teacher-scholar integration, I always say that the hyphen is the most important part of that phrase. It is coming together as learners, so faculty coming together as learners with students and with staff. You are a very vibrant learning community. You're reducing boundaries and silos. You are an important agent in connecting academic and student affairs. And finally, you're role models. You're curious. You think ahead. You look into the future. You're risk takers, path makers. You're incredible university stewards because you've had to be. I know it's easy to feel bad about that because it's often not fun, but take pride in it. Wear it as a strength that you have to model to the rest of the institution. Look at what you've done with that. You're incredibly responsible managers of all kinds of resources, human and other. You use assessment very effectively, use of data for continuous improvement, innovation, fiscal responsibility. And you are very good at making strategic choices, which require clarity of goals, clarity of purpose. So those are the hats that I see our library leaders having, and they are essential. I am mindful of some of the personnel choices that we make about libraries because it's work that I've been working on at Stetson over the last few years. And I will say to you, the model at our DuPont Ball Library is very different than the model at our Hand Library for Law. So the decisions we have to make is, what about the roles of library staff, faculty, tenure, non-tenure, term limited? Should it be a mixture? We need to have versatility. We need to have refreshment in our library because I'm looking to you to be a university leader. I'm looking to you to be a change agent in our environment, a special change agent because of your neutrality, because of the experience that you've had. Should it be a dean or director level position? So I was very deliberate. First of all, we have faculty, librarian faculty, and I believe that's very important if we're construing the library as leaders of learning. But we also have a dean now of the library, and I'm very happy to say it's our first endowed dean position, which I also think symbolically becomes very important. We also have a dean, and that sends a very important message as well about the punctuation of learning in our environment and the very important role that library leaders play. Finally, my final point is we need to feed you. So if I'm going to put all those hats on you, then I have an obligation to you. I have an obligation to support you. I have an obligation to support your ongoing professional development because I need you to be cutting edge. I need you to be looking to the future and playing in the future. But I also need to help you have development as leaders. So leadership development is something that we have not done well in higher education. And I would say it needs to start with librarian leaders. So leadership development, professional development, we support you. I'm sorry I didn't bark more or growl more, but I appreciate everything that you do every day.
Okay? Now, I can see Albert's moved into position already, so there you are. Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Yes. My name's Albert Joy. I'm acquisitions librarian at the University of Vermont. Yesterday, our first plenary speaker criticized the current business model used by the major journal publishers, which is characterized by lack of transparency and by non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements. The non-transparency hides the actual costs to the vendors, and what we are imposed with in these big deals is based on some expenditure from the print past with added inflationary yearly charges beyond the cost of living. My question really to the provosts. Now, I come from the University of Vermont. It's not part of a big system. It's quite isolated where it is, the only university in the state. We have very little clout, if any clout, with the publishers who will say quite directly that their mission is to return a good return on the investment
Albert,
of their investors. I'll get to the question. My question is, what can the provosts do to help the university provide the materials needed? And I believe this affects the priorities that you mentioned of both risk, revenue, and reputation. What can any of you speak to your ability to help us and help the university? Thank you.
I'll just, is this on?
Is it on?
I'll start by just saying briefly, at my level, we are very interested in expanding collaborations with other independent colleges in our area. That's our niche, our sector, and are pushing hard for creative solutions to avoid the isolation you're talking about, because I do think it puts us at risk in a number of ways.
I would agree. You know, I think the benefit we have here is coalition building skill, you know, and I think that the onus is on us to work nationally. One institution is not going to change this. So how can we use the professional organizations of which we are a part? So for example, the Council on Independent Colleges, you know, is a very large group of institutions, and we need to be using those coalitions to exert pressure.
Okay. Anybody upstairs in gold?
In gold, we have a question.
Okay, gold first then.
Hi there. This is loud. My name is Josh Lupkin. I'm a humanities bibliographer at Tulane University. And my question for the provost was that, especially comparing what you all have said to our first plenary talk yesterday, is about what you were saying about advocacy and about the role of librarians in advocating for various very worthy projects that university administrations, various folks, and provosts want, including interdisciplinary research.
Question, please.
Yes. How can we, do you have any comments about how we can do that while remaining neutral? As you say, you say we're neutral, but there's great neutral. How can we advocate and be neutral and trusted if we're putting projects that the faculty may not actually think they want?
Okay. Aha, Beth.
Thank you.
By staying focused on learning and staying focused on university strategies and key priorities and goals. I'm not sure I totally understand the question. I think that the opportunity here is staying focused on university priority. And if priority is establishing interdisciplinary opportunities, then I think your role is essential and critical in that. I do think you can stay neutral in doing that by working with, across the university with various teams. I don't think you have to be seen suspiciously in doing that if you are helping the faculty to make meaning of that priority and connecting it to student learning.
Any other provosts? Yeah? Jim? John?
Is this on? No.
It will be in a second. Is it?
Okay. I think that there's some problem on
Is it
both
switched
sides.
on? Is it switched on?
That on the university side, we tend to oversimplify what publishers do, and we say that the taxpayers pay for the research, we give it away for free to the publishers, and they make us buy it back. Publishers play a critical role, and the system couldn't work without them. But on the other hand, not-for-profit society publishers typically increase set the price of their journals not only to meet the cost of publishing, but to add revenue for running their societies. And I believe particularly some for-profit publishers have figured out that the university is essentially a captive market for high-quality journals, and they can price them at almost any unlimited price, and universities will be forced to buy it. On those issues, I don't think librarians should or do stay neutral. We need collective action to affect change, and groups like AAU and ARL and APLU are working on that. But I think that the solution is going to come, as I tried to suggest, by getting publishers to understand that the system they participate in, when it's a public service education research operation, largely publicly funded, they have to participate in that in different terms than they might do in their other business. And until we can get collective action to put pressure on those parts of the system that I think are not operating that way, we're going to continue to have the problems that we've seen. But I think collective action is a solution. I think publishers are beginning to understand that. Government agencies are beginning to understand that. We'll be smart if we do it largely without government mandate by working it out among ourselves, but we may need government to come in as well, and we're seeing some of that with this OSTP directive.
Let me just add a couple of words. I resonated strongly when Beth said neutral is a role for librarians, but I would emphasize neutrality does not mean inertia. One of the things a provost sees is that the diversity of disciplines and the diversity of really business models on which disciplines work is extraordinary in any academic institution. Simply the difference between science and humanities, but by the time you have a school of communications and a school of fine arts and a school of engineering, you're really pulling together a variety of kinds of business models, a variety of kinds of priorities. The librarians in this setting begin with an independence of mind and a university-wide perspective. And when, in my experience, the librarians say, this is a priority, we see this for the institution as something that's needed, that's a voice that a provost both can and should take seriously and benefits from taking seriously, precisely because of that, if not neutrality, let's say objectivity.
Okay, do you
Let
want
me just add one more comment. But neutrality does not necessarily mean being a pawn of the administration, which is sort of what I think I was hearing in that question. To me, it is not getting into that political game, but staying focused on university priorities, staying focused on our priorities for student learning.
Okay, I think we can run over into the break by 5 minutes, or perhaps slightly more, because I think this is so important. Sandy, could you ask a very quick question, and I'll go to Colonial.
Sandy Thatcher, former director of Penn State Press. My question is to John, has to do with the task force's idea about the first publication of a book by a junior faculty member in open access mode. I suspect that idea was proposed by Paul Courant, who was actually...
Yeah, just the question, please, Sandy.
His basic idea is this: the easiest way to get to open access publication of monographs is by increasing the amount you normally give to junior faculty, you know, which is around some 10,000,
Yeah.
20,000, up to 50,000 to include the publication of the first book. Is that the idea that you're talking about?
That is the idea. One way of looking at it is for
I'm sorry, but we
humanities and
can't
social-
hear in gold.
It is for the humanities and social sciences,
Okay.
the functional equivalent of startup costs in the sciences. And a lot of universities do this, as you suggested, Sandy, but I think it's a notion of doing it more systematically so that there's, and we have to work with the presses to do this, but moving from subsidizing presses to subsidizing authors in a systematic way is what we're talking about.
Okay, just one more question from anybody from Colonial.
Yes, thank you, Tony. Tony, this is Jim McGinty from Cambridge Information Group, and I have a question specific to the three provosts. What percentage of the university's resources, your budget, is being afforded to the library in terms of, is it decreasing or increasing? And do you use this metric in comparing yourselves to your competitors, or your peers, I should say?
Okay, that's an important question.
At my three institutions, small colleges, we did not use this as a metric to benchmark externally. I actually don't know the percentage, but I can speak to the rising and falling budgets over the past 6 years on two campuses. Budgets have been relatively flat, which of course means a net reduction. And that has been a managerial challenge that I've worked on with my library directors.
I would say we use it to benchmark among our affinity group. So that is something that our library leadership does. We have been relatively flat in most areas in the library over the last several years. Quite frankly, that has matched the business model that the library leaders have established because of innovations that we have realized in our library. I think the exciting new direction that we're taking is to introduce an innovation fund so that the library can be the originator of innovation, and also, you know, that helps in being a change agent throughout the institution. If we have some innovation funding in the library that can help to seed some of the activity around various areas of the academic program, that becomes, you know, obviously a help to being a change agent.
Jim, good to hear your voice. At Georgetown, we did not manage to the percent of budget occupied by the library, and I would assume that may have flattened a bit, but we did address specific library needs in two ways, one of which is that we had an above-inflation percentage built into the collection budget for the library, recognizing the unique condition of library materials acquisitions. And so where salaries advanced as salaries do, the collections budget advanced rather more rapidly than that. It's also the case that I introduced when new academic programs were proposed. I required the academic unit proposing to work with the library on a library impact statement and to address in their proposal for the project what the impact on the library would be, and if there were new revenues from a new program, how some of those revenues would go. This is interesting, not least because only two of us will know that Jim McGinty and I worked together on exactly one of those. And we built a good new program at Georgetown and were able to make it strong because we did pay attention to the library at that level of granularity.
Okay, you don't want to say anything, John, no? No. Okay, thank you so much, all of you.